First of all, before I allow you
Tracy.
to introduce yourself, rate
Yes.
my sign language so that we put a stamp on it.
That's actually a very good start. I can say at least you can be able to, if you can even be able to fingerspell your first name, then at least we are heading somewhere right now.
Thank you so much. It makes me feel happier. But anyway, please do introduce yourself.
Yeah, good. So my name is Bernard Oduor, just the way Tracy has indicated. Actually, I'm a sign language interpreter at the Kenya Institute of Special Education. And actually, I'm so glad to come and participate and to share with you, or rather celebrate with you this special day that is actually not only here in Kenya, but it is actually an international day of sign language. And it is being celebrated all over the globe.
Maybe give us how KISE celebrated the International Deaf Awareness Day today.
Good. So from Tuesday this week, there were so many activities within the Institute whereby so many deaf adults were able to grace the occasion up to yesterday when they were still strolling in. And so there are so many activities. They had meetings. They had so many trainings that are also taking place there, just in the area of the deaf community. Yes.
So, Mr. Bernard, I want to ask, why did we wait all this time to sensitize our country and our other citizens on the importance of sign language? I remember when we were having the discussion just before we came on set, I told you I have an uncle who is also deaf and mute.
Yeah.
And I struggle a lot to communicate to him. He seems very excited when he has his stories, but I cannot sign at all. You've just seen how I sign terribly.
Exactly.
So why did we wait all this time? And maybe just to put them together, the history of sign language. Where did it all start?
Good. So actually, sign language started in France. So France is the mother of sign language all over the world. So France started sign language started in a very interesting way. We used to have monks in France, and for them to be able to respect their oath of silence, they adopted some manual alphabets that they used to use, such that if somebody needed something, you just had to raise that card, whether it was letter A or B. So it indicated something among themselves, so there was no talking. And somebody realized, apart from this thing that is helping the monks here, this can also be very helpful to the deaf community.
Interesting.
So that is actually how sign language. So somebody came and realized that whatever the monks were doing could actually be of more benefit to the deaf community. And so after getting that knowledge, so this person went out and now came up first with the manual alphabets of the deaf. That was from letter A to Z. So that is where it started from. And at first, the deafs used to communicate through finger spelling. Just the way you are finger spelling your name. So then with time, that is when now science started evolving. Science started evolving, and now they could be able to come up with something which was very formal, that could even be done within an education setup. And so the first school of the deaf was set up in France. That was around 1817.
Wow.
And then the reason why sign language, what killed sign language along the way, in the year 1880, there was a conference in Milan. That was in France. There were some people who were not very comfortable with the issue of deaf being taught sign language, or the deafs learning through the use of sign language. So we had two groups. We had one group that were feeling that the deafs should be taught through oralism, that they should just look at the teacher's lips and then learn through that.
Wow.
And then there's another group that felt no, because sign language had evolved, and at least it was something that now the deafs could be able to use, and even the first school of the deaf was already established in France. So they felt, why not? Why should we again stop this? And yet it's already, yeah. And so it was from that spot that now when the conference was called, people from different educators, stakeholders participated in that conference. Unfortunately, America was not part of that conference. And what happened with Americans, when actually France started sign language, they are the first people to run there to learn it. So when they got the sign language, they went back to their country and made sign language to be something very good. They really made it so good, but they were not part of the conference, Milan Conference of 1880. So in this conference, these people are not able to come to a consensus, and so they voted. And when they were voting, those people who felt that deaf should be taught through oralism actually won.
Was it because of investment, or what was the issue?
Yeah, and yeah, that's a very good view. Actually, it was because of investment, because it seems that there were people who felt that this was a very good business opportunity where they could be able to make a hearing aid and be able to sell them. So it was like there was some investors or people who were thinking that when deafs use sign language, maybe whatever their mission was not going to be fulfilled. So it was after that that most countries now, the deafs were learning through oralism. So sign language was banned totally, including Kenya. And so it really took even the deafs themselves a very long time. They used to lip read or to speech read. They just look at the lips of the teacher and then they
How effective was that?
It was not effective, actually. And in fact, that is what retarded the growth of sign language for a very long time. And in the year 1980s, around 1980s, we have got Professor Michael Ndurumo. Right now, he is a professor at the University of Nairobi. So Professor Michael Ndurumo is the one who went to America after finishing his O-level here in Kenya, and he went to further studies in America. So even the university that he had applied for, which is known as Gallaudet University, was named after the person, Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet, who went to study sign language in France and came back with it in America. And they are the people who refined sign language to a very high level in America. But now, because Americans were not part of the group that was there in Milan, so America, they continued using sign language. And when Professor Michael Ndurumo went to that university, he came back to Kenya in 1986. And that is the person who advocated for the use of sign language. That is when Kenya now started using sign language.
So in our history class, you can say sign language became official in Kenya in 1986.
Yes, in 1986.
So why did we wait all this time to now start the frenzy and the noise about making sign language a national, actually it's a national language.
Yeah,
but now we're talking about inclusivity.
Yes.
I've known my uncle 25 years of my life, but until today, I still cannot sign to him. So why did we wait all this time, and what does it say about our society?
Very good question. Actually, why it has taken that long is because if you look at the education of the deafs, they used to learn maybe through primary. Very few used to make it to the secondary. And after secondary school, they used to be taken to vocational center.
Well, because the oralism, they don't understand.
Yeah, they never used to understand. But when they used to go to, for example, to vocational institutions, maybe they do plumbing, tailoring, and what have you. It was after there now they take different directions. But now as sign language was growing up. Sign language, like it was around 1996 that now sign language was started being taught just independently as a sign language. That is when interpreters now started coming in. And actually the people who made sign language to grow very fast were interpreters, because the coming in of interpreters influenced so much even the learning of the deaf people, so that the deaf people were now able even to pass very well and even join universities and further their education. Even right now as we speak, I think we have a commissioner who is a deaf person who is working in Ombudsman office. And that is happening for the first time in Kenya. That is after, because I think when the sign language interpreters came in, the deafs are very able now to get even what the lecturers were doing or whatever was happening within the education sector. Although we still have many universities where our deafs go, but we realize that we still don't have interpreters, which is still a challenge actually.
Bernard, you've thrown us into our next area of questions. It's how different sectors affect people living with deafness. And you've spoken clearly about education. Maybe I'll ask you about CBC and what you think about it and how special education can be applied. But also let's go to the matatu sector. You gave me an interesting story, Bernard. I'd let you take the floor.
Good. So that's actually part that I think the Matatu Owners Association should look into, and if possible, that at least their touts and drivers should get some know-how or some knowledge on sign language.
On that, how do you spot a deaf person? How can you tell?
Yes. Yeah, normally what happens, that has been a very big challenge actually, because you cannot even identify that this is a deaf person when you meet with him one-on-one. Sometimes it is very difficult, unless you see that person throwing the hands in the air, then you can be able to, or when you communicate with them, then maybe they ask you some question through their hands, then that's when you can be able to identify, oh, this is a deaf person, he cannot be able to hear, or when he asks you for a piece of paper to write something that he wants to communicate back to you, then that's the only time you can be able to realize that this person could not be able to hear whatever you're trying to speak to him.
So to the story of the Matatu sector.
Yeah, so the Matatu sector, just as I said, actually I'm a witness of one incident where a deaf person was died on the spot because the driver maybe assumed that this person could be able to hear when he was trying to hoot along the road. And it was very early in the morning, and the car was overspeeding, and this deaf person was crossing the road, and he was not able to hear. Maybe it's like the Matatu was a bit a distance, and so he assumed maybe that the driver could be able to see him or even give him time to cross the road. But unfortunately, the driver was hooting and at the same time overspeeding, and it took a bit of time, actually. And the driver assumed that this person was hearing. And unfortunately, the driver rammed into him, and that was how he lost his life on the spot, just because of lack of awareness. I think we need to create a lot of awareness so that our drivers also and touts should be able to identify that not every person who is crossing the road can be able to hear. We have got a good number of the deaf people who die every day. Unfortunately, it is just reported that it's a road accident. No one comes out actually to spell out that we have got this number of deaf people who have died because
of road accidents.
Yes.
Interesting topic. And this week, the CS for Public Service and Gender Affirmative Action actually launched the Protection Against Domestic Violence Act. We showed you this. And part of the conversation, or the major part of the conversation, was talking about women and girls being liable to violence. But I'm looking at or thinking about people living with deafness. How do they report? How do they know that such exists? In the event, there was no interpreter. So if there's violence against people living with deafness, how do they get to report?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. Most of the time, you realize that we normally have got a toll-free number that someone is given to call. Unfortunately, for the deaf community, they cannot be able to call. So we are requesting the CS, before publishing this, they need to actually consult so that they can also consider the deaf community, because they can only be able to SMS. They cannot be able to call because they can only send a text message, especially when they are in a situation where they need maybe some emergency or something like that. And so we are requesting them, actually, apart from the toll-free number that is normally given out, we also need another number that they can be able to text so that they can be able to get the response back also through text messages.
Maybe how has the government also supported? Because, well, we can be out here castigating and talking about it, but how has the government also helped the deaf community to our inclusivity in this country
today? Very good. So in terms of inclusivity, there is a lot that actually the government has done. We have got a number of teachers who have been trained, especially in different special areas. We have got teachers who have been trained to specifically be able to handle learners who are deaf in special schools. But right now what the government is trying to do, they're trying to bring in the aspect of inclusivity by ensuring that most schools or most of the teachers who are trained in special needs education or in hearing impairment can be able to go back to regular schools, and they can be able to assist these learners who are deaf within that setup.
So will we be seeing a merge of regular schools and special schools sometime
Actually,
soon?
that is what we are waiting, and we are waiting to see whether it will come to take place. But still there is a challenge, because you realize that apart from these teachers who are learning or who have been trained in deaf area or in hearing impairment, they cannot all be able maybe to fit in all regular schools. So we also have teachers who are trained in autism and other special areas. So these other teachers may be in those regular schools, but unfortunately they may not be able to handle learners who are deaf. So there is still a gap there, and I think we should also look into that one.
I think because Kenya has been described as a religious country,
Yes,
let's talk about deaf people and religion.
Wow.
How does religion accommodate deaf people?
Community.
And how does it look for them going to church? Yes.
Wow, that's a very good question. Because most people normally ask, how do these deaf people, are they even able to worship? Do they even sing? How do they do this? And do they... So we have got, for example, we have got like the Catholic Church, we have got the Presbyterian Church, the PCA, which they have got those, they have given deaf some time, especially when you visit even SK, Holy Family Basilica, you realize that they have slotted some time where the deafs themselves have their own service. And even the deafs have their own pastors. Even if they normally have a service, maybe it can take 2 or 3 hours, where the deaf pastor can be able to preach to them so that they can be able to get the message very fast. The deafs also worship very well. In fact, when they worship, you'll assume that maybe all of them can be able to hear, because sometimes they even they can be able to sing. They use drum. There are those who also beat the drums when they are singing at the same time. Yeah. So it's normally a very interesting thing that they happen, especially when they are doing the service on their own.
Well, we jumped straight at the conversation, but now let me take you back to deafness and gaining deafness. I understand there's prelingual and postlingual.
Yes.
So could you explain or break it down for us that we understand?
Good. So when we talk about prelingual, these are the deaf people or the deaf who are born without acquiring the first language, any language actually. So, and we also have postlingual. These are the deafness. These are a group of deaf people who become deaf actually after acquiring their first language. So that's why you call them postlingual. So you'll realize that if you look at their lifestyle, there is a bit of difference even in terms of communication. These ones who are postlingual, if you even read their speech, you'll realize that you can be able to read their speech flows very well. And if you look at those ones who are prelingual, their speech somehow does not, it's not, they're so much into KSL. Remember that KSL mostly is it is in the form of object, subject, verb. It does not follow the English word order of subject, verb, object. So that is actually the main difference. So sometimes when you read their English, you may wonder which type of English is this, but that is actually how they do KSL.
I think Paul taught me one. He said, when I say you don't want to miss, you say you no miss. Yes, so that one I caught. So I want you to please maybe tell us or show us some of the common signs as I continue learning how to sign my name as we wind up.
Yes.
So what are some of the common signs? And is sign language Kanaluo deaf person communicate to a Kikuyu deaf person?
Very well.
Yes.
Very well. That's a very good question actually. Sometimes when we ask a deaf who is a Luo, whether he's a Luo, tell you no, my language is just, I'm a deaf person. The same also applies to a Kikuyu deaf person. So what actually brings them together is the fact that number one, they are deaf, and so they also have something known as deaf culture. So within their deaf culture, they like meeting and interacting within themselves, and they feel that sense of belonging among themselves. So normally they don't have that boundary. In fact, when you hurt one deaf person, whether it's from a Luo or whatever, in fact, the whole deaf community will really feel that pinch. So they don't have that barrier that I'm a deaf from a Luo community, or I'm a deaf from a Kikuyu community.
So there's no
And even sometimes their voting is inclined in that way. They just believe that anything or any person who is taking the position, whatever will do good to the deaf, that will affect almost all the deaf people.
So no, there's no tribalism.
Actually, there is no tribalism.
In sign language.
In sign language.
Show us some common signs that we can learn today. My producers are also behind these cameras, and I hope they'll be learning as well with us.
Okay.
So maybe water. How do you say water?
Yeah. So for example, when you want to say water, we use water. Water, yes. Water. Water. So we are directing it to the mouth.
Water.
Remember, this is letter W.
Okay.
Yeah, water. Water, yes. And maybe, for example, we have a word like sorry, when you want to say sorry. So you're using a clenched fist, you make a circular movement in your chest to show sorry. And even the word please, it is open palm, making a circular movement around your chest. Please, please. And maybe you want also to say forgive. For example, when you want to say forgive, so you have to swipe left and right to show that you are forgiving that person. Completely, yes.
How do you say worship?
Oh, worship, good. Yeah. So worship, you sign worship.
Worship.
Yes, worship.
Okay.
Worship.
And maybe worship. I'm going to try sign my name. So
yes.
Tracy is T R A C Y. Did I get it?
Wow, that is good. That is good.
That is good. Thank you so much, Bernard. But maybe you can give us your parting shot now and why we should learn sign language.
Wow, wow. Especially with this generation, I think this is now the best time to learn sign language. If maybe you are out there and maybe you have not thought of doing sign language, kindly do so. Because there are so many things that are now coming up. Right now, it is an offense actually to have a meeting without having a sign language interpreter.
Yes.
Most news in television stations, you cannot do without a sign language interpreter. Even in churches nowadays, we see most churches are ensuring that the sign language interpreter is there so that in case we have a deaf person within that setup, then he will not be able to miss out on whatever is taking place.
Yeah, they also welcome.
feel, exactly. They also feel part of it.
So how do you say thank you? I want to say thank you before we go for a break.
Say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.